The Tennessee Department of Agriculture held its annual awards ceremony in a Nashville hotel ballroom on a spring evening in 2006. The chandeliers threw soft yellow light across 200 faces, most of them weathered, most of them belonging to men who had spent their lives bent over soil. Near the back of the room, in the second to last row, an older gentleman sat very still in a folding chair. His name was Whitfield Tatum. He was 67 years old. He had driven up from Lewisburg that morning because his father had asked him to 20 years before he died. The presenter at the podium was reading from a card. 43 years of continuous operation, 740 acres, zero debt, 11 consecutive years with the highest soil quality ratings in the district. Then the presenter looked up from the card and added the line he had not written down, the line he could not bring himself to leave out. Mr. Holloman began farming this operation alone at the age of 14. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when a fact lands wrong. 200 farmers' men who knew exactly what 14 meant in a cornfield, men who had been 14 themselves and could not have imagined doing what that sentence described. Whitfield Tatum closed his eyes. His father had told him about that boy 1,000 times. His father had been the one who told that boy to go home. Whitfield reached into his jacket pocket and felt the corner of an envelope. He had been carrying it for 17 years. The story did not begin in that ballroom. The story began on a Thursday morning in October of 1963 in a barn outside the small town of Lewisburg, Tennessee, when a 14-year-old boy named Jasper Holloman walked through the door at 6 in the morning and found his father lying on the dirt floor next to a partially disassembled tractor. Hollis Holloman was 44 years old. He had been a healthy man the night before. He had eaten 2 helpings of his wife's pork roast and complained about the price of seed corn and gone to bed at 9:30. Sometime after midnight, his heart had stopped. He had walked out to the barn before dawn, the way he always did, to finish work on the John Deere 60 he had been repairing all week. He had collapsed beside it. He was already cold when his oldest son found him. Jasper did not run. He did not scream. He sat down on the dirt floor next to his father and took his father's hand, the same hand that had taught him to tie a square knot, taught him to load a hay wagon, taught him 3 days earlier how to set the gap on a spark plug. He sat there for 20 minutes in the gray light filtering through the barn boards. He was 14 years old, and he buried his father once in those 20 minutes before anyone else knew there would need to be a funeral. The second burial would come later. The first burial happened on a barn floor with a wrench still in a dead man's grip. Then Jasper stood up and walked back to the house and woke his mother. The night before, Hollis had been sitting on the porch with Jasper after supper. The corn was high in the field, ready to come off in another few weeks, and Hollis had pointed at the line of black walnut trees along the western fence. "Your great-grandfather planted those trees in 1898, he said. "This farm has lived through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. It will live through anything else as long as somebody keeps it." Jasper had laughed. "Pop, you act like you're going somewhere. You're 44. Hollis did not laugh. He looked at his son for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he is trying to memorize. "Keep the farm, Jasper. Don't let anybody tell you it's too big. That's what I'm asking." Jasper had not understood why his father was being so serious. By 6 the next morning, he understood, and the understanding never went away. The funeral was held 3 days later at First Methodist Church on the edge of town. The Reverend Obadiah Pruitt, a tall, thin man of 55, who had baptized Jasper when Jasper was 4 months old, gave the eulogy. He spoke about Hollis's hands, about Hollis's quiet faith, about Hollis's reputation among neighbors. He did not speak about what was going to happen to the farm. Nobody did, Adelaide Holloman sat in the front pew with her 4 children pressed against her, her face the color of bone, her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles showed white through her skin. Wendell, 11 years old, cried into his mother's sleeve. The 2 girls, 8 and 5, did not entirely understand what was happening. Jasper did not cry. He stood beside the casket like a soldier on watch, in a borrowed black suit 2 sizes too large, and he did not move until the service ended. Afterward, in the church hall, Reverend Pruitt pulled Jasper aside near the coffee urn. The older man bent down so they were eye to eye. "Jasper, I know what you are thinking. Your father was a remarkable man, but you are not your father, you are Jasper. Let your mother make the decisions about the farm. That is her job now, not yours." Jasper did not answer. He looked down at his shoes, which were also too large, borrowed from a cousin. He understood for the first time that the entire town was about to spend the next several months trying to convince him to give up. The Reverend was only the first one to try. That same afternoon, while the casseroles were still arriving on the kitchen counter, a black Buick pulled into the gravel driveway. A man in a gray suit stepped out, brushed the dust from his trouser legs, and walked to the front door. His name was Quentin Pemberton. He was 46 years old, the senior loan officer at First Tennessee Bank in Lewisburg, and he had a courteous manner that did not extend as far as kindness. Adelaide invited him into the kitchen. Jasper stood in the doorway just out of sight and listened. "Mrs. Holloman, I am very sorry for your loss. Your husband was a fine farmer. I want to be respectful of what you are going through, but I also have a duty to be honest with you, and the kindest thing I can do is be honest now rather than later." Adelaide nodded. She did not speak. "Your husband still owes the bank $1,800 from the spring operating loan. The note matures in March. I have looked at the household income. I have looked at what 160 acres of standing corn typically yields in a good year. With your husband, that loan would have been paid off without difficulty. Without him, I am not sure how it gets paid." Adelaide closed her eyes briefly. "I want to suggest something. Alden Mosby farms the land just east of yours. He is a good man. He has expressed interest in leasing your acreage on a long-term basis. The lease income would cover the property tax. You would keep the house. You and the children could stay where you are. You could find work in town. The bank would extend grace on the spring note in light of your circumstances. This is not a foreclosure conversation, Mrs. Holloman. This is a survival conversation." He paused. He folded his hands on the kitchen table. "Mrs. Holloman, do not let sentiment make a financial decision for you. A widow with 4 children does not have room for romance about land." The kitchen door clicked shut behind him a few minutes later. Adelaide put her face in her hands and wept without sound. Jasper stood in the doorway and watched his mother cry, and he learned in that instant what it meant to hate a man not for what the man said, but for the soft, polite voice he used to say it. That night, lying in the bed he shared with Wendell, Jasper stared at the ceiling and listened to his brother sleep. The room was cold. The house was full of the smell of food brought by neighbors that nobody had eaten. He thought about his father on the porch. He thought about the trees planted in 1898. He thought about Quentin Pemberton's voice. By morning, he had decided. Thursday morning came 9 days after the funeral. The kitchen was empty when Jasper came downstairs at 4:30. He took down his father's work coat from the hook by the back door. He put it on. The shoulders dropped and almost to his elbows. He rolled the sleeves 3 times. He sat on the back step and pulled on his father's leather work boots, which were 2 full sizes too large, and he stuffed wadded newspaper into the toes so his feet would not slide forward when he walked. He stood up. He took 2 experimental steps. The boots stayed on. He went into the kitchen and took down the parts order his father had written 10 days earlier. The handwriting was neat and unhurried. A clutch assembly for a 1955 John Deere 60, $28 paid on pickup. The dealership was Tatum's John Deere in Lewisburg, 7 miles down the road. Adelaide came into the kitchen as he was folding the order into his coat pocket. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at her son, wearing her dead husband's clothes, and for a long moment she said nothing. Jasper, he turned to her. I cannot tell you not to go. I cannot tell you I support this either. I do not have enough strength for both. I know, Mom. What are you going to tell Mr. Tatum? I'm going to tell him I came to pick up the part Pop ordered. And if he won't sell it to you. Jasper looked at his mother. She was 38 years old. She'd been a wife 11 days ago. She had been a girl 10 years before that. She had aged decades in the past week and a half. And Jasper saw it clearly for the first time, the way the skin had loosened around her eyes, the way her hands had taken on the trembling that would never entirely go away. He will sell it to me, Jasper said. He walked out the back door before she could answer. He climbed into his father's 1958 Ford F-100 pickup. He folded a wool blanket into a thick square and placed it on the driver's seat so he could see over the steering wheel. He worked the clutch with the toe of his boot, stalled the truck twice, got it started, and drove the 7 miles into Lewisburg on back roads in the gray morning light. Tatum's John Deere sat at the corner of Mooresville Pike and 2nd Avenue, a long, low cinder block building with a green and yellow sign and a row of new tractors lined up out front under a string of light bulbs. Jasper parked at the side. He walked across the gravel toward the front door. The boots felt like buckets on his feet. The door had a brass bell that rang when he pushed it open. Mercer Tatum was at the parts counter, 62 years old, white hair combed straight back, reading glasses on a thin gold chain around his neck. He was wearing a pressed white shirt with a small green John Deere pin at the collar and pleated khaki trousers. He had owned the dealership for 37 years. He had sold Hollis Holloman his first tractor when Hollis was 25 and a second tractor 12 years later, and he had stood in the third pew at Hollis's funeral with his hat held flat against his chest. He looked up now and saw a child in a man's coat. Jasper, son, come in. Mr. Tatum, how is your mother holding up? She is managing. Jasper walked to the counter. He took the parts order from his coat pocket and set it down on the glass. Mercer picked it up. He read it. He set it back down. He took off his reading glasses, very slowly folded them, and let them hang on their chain against his shirt. When he looked at Jasper again, his eyes were the eyes of a man who had been thinking about this conversation for 9 days and had hoped not to have it. Son, I need to talk to you. The part came in. Pop said it would be here Tuesday. It came in Tuesday. It is on the shelf behind me right now. I am not asking you about that. I am asking you who is going to install it. I am. Jasper. I have been working on that tractor with Pop since I was 9. I can split it. I can pull the clutch. I can put it back together. He taught me how. He taught me. Mercer was quiet for a long count. 2 other men were standing near the coffee pot at the side of the showroom. One of them was Alden Mosby, 67 years old, the neighbor Quentin Pemberton had mentioned by name 3 days earlier. The other was a younger farmer named Ed Henderson. Both of them had stopped talking. Both of them were listening. Son, I am going to say something hard, and I am going to say it because I knew your father and because I owe him this. Your father is gone. I want you to go home. I want you to tell your mother to call Alden Mosby. Alden is right here in this room, and he will treat your family fair. He will lease the ground at a price that pays your taxes and then some. You and your brother and your sisters can stay in the house. Your mother can find work in town. There is no shame in any of this. A great many widows with farms have done exactly the same thing, and their children grew up fine, and the land stayed in the family because somebody else worked it for a while. You cannot run 160 acres alone. You are 14 years old. I knew your father at 34, and he was a grown man with 20 years of experience, and he still had hard years. You do not have the size or the strength or the equipment for this, and I am not going to sell you a clutch assembly and stand here behind this counter and watch you get hurt or worse. I am sorry. Alden Mosby nodded slowly from across the showroom. He is right, son. There is no disgrace in leasing. Your daddy would have understood. Jasper looked at the parts order on the counter. He looked at the clutch assembly visible on the shelf behind Mercer, wrapped in brown paper, his father's name penciled on the side. He looked up at Mercer. My daddy told me something the night before he died. He told me to keep the farm. He told me not to let anybody tell me it was too big. He said, keep it, Jasper. He said that to me 9 days ago, Mr. Tatum. So are you going to sell me that clutch assembly, or do I need to drive to the dealership in Columbia? The silence in the showroom changed shape. Ed Henderson set his coffee cup down on the table without making a sound. Alden Mosby looked at the floor. Mercer Tatum did not move for a long time. Then he turned around. He walked back through the doorway into the parts room. He came back out carrying the brown paper package. He set it on the counter beside the order slip. He did not look at Jasper's face. $28. Jasper counted the bills out of an envelope from his coat pocket. The envelope was his father's. The money was his father's. The coat was his father's. Everything Jasper had in the world that morning belonged to a man who had been in the ground for 9 days. He laid the bills on the counter in a neat stack. Mercer took the money. He did not put it in the register right away. He just held it in his hand. When Jasper picked up the package and turned to leave, Mercer spoke. Jasper. The boy stopped at the door. Be careful with that tractor. Yes, sir. The bell rang as the door closed. Mercer Tatum stood at the counter holding $28 in his hand. He did not move for almost a minute. Alden Mosby finally walked over. He laid a hand on Mercer's shoulder. You did the right thing telling him no, Mercer. I did not tell him no. I sold him the part. After you tried. I sold a dead man's son a clutch assembly because I could not look at him in his daddy's coat and tell him to go home a second time. That is not the right thing, Alden. That is just the thing I could live with. Mercer rang the sale into the register. He made himself a note on a yellow pad beside the phone. He did not know yet what the note meant or what he would do with it. The note said drive past the Holloman place every week. He would. For the next 20 years he would. Jasper drove home with the clutch assembly on the seat beside him. Halfway back, he pulled the truck onto the shoulder of a county road, climbed down, walked 20 paces into a hayfield that did not belong to him, and stood in the brown stubble and cried for 3 minutes. Then he wiped his face on the sleeve of his father's coat and walked back to the truck and drove the rest of the way home. Adelaide was waiting at the kitchen table. There was a list of household bills written out on a sheet of lined paper. Property tax, electric, fuel, seed loan, Quentin Pemberton's $1,800. She slid the paper across the table to Jasper. I added it up, she said. If the corn comes in at 80 bushels an acre, we can pay everything. If it comes in at 60, we cannot. It will come in. You do not know that. I will make it come in. Adelaide reached across the table and took her son's hand. The hand was scraped along 2 knuckles from something Jasper had done that morning that she had not seen. You do not have to be your father, Jasper. I'm not trying to be Pop. I am only trying to be his son. Adelaide did not answer. She got up from the table, walked to the sink, and stood with her back to him for a long time, washing a plate that was already clean. Jasper sat at the table and looked at the list of bills. After a while, he folded it into his coat pocket and went out to the barn. He spent 3 days installing the clutch. The work required separating the front half of the tractor from the rear half, a job his father had always done with two men in a cradle. Jasper had no helper. He built a wooden cradle out of barn timber. He was too small to lift the clutch assembly into position with his arms, so he ran a length of rope through a pulley fixed to a beam in the barn loft, tied the assembly to one end, and used his weight on the other end to hoist the part into place. It took him most of a day to figure out the geometry of it. He worked 16 hours straight on the second day and slept 4 hours on a horse blanket on the barn floor before going back at it. On Sunday afternoon, the third day, he turned the key in the John Deere 60 and the engine caught on the second crank. He sat on the seat and listened to it run, and he smiled for the first time since his father had died. Wendell came out to the barn that evening with a covered plate of supper. He was 11 years old and small for his age. He stood in the doorway and watched his older brother eating cold chicken on the workbench beside the running tractor. Rorik Calloway came by the schoolyard today. Jasper chewed. What did he want? He said to tell you his mama already leased their ground. He said he saw it in your face you would not last till Thanksgiving. He said he is taking bets at the gas station. Jasper did not answer. Wendell stood in the doorway a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the house through the gathering dark. 2 hours later, Jasper was washing his hands at the pump outside the back porch when he heard tires on the gravel. Rorik Calloway climbed out of the cab of his older brother's truck and walked across the yard. Rorik was 15, a year older than Jasper. His own father had died in a logging accident in August, 8 weeks before Hollis Holloman had collapsed in the barn. Rorik had not spoken to Jasper since either funeral. "You really gonna try this?" Rorik said. "I am not trying anything. I am doing it. My mama signed our lease yesterday. Alden Mosby took our 120 acres for 3 years. Good for your mama. Don't say it like that. I am not saying it like anything. Yes, you are. You are saying it like she gave up, like I gave up. My daddy died too, Jasper. 8 weeks before yours. You think you are the only one. I never said that. You did not have to. The whole town is watching you, and every time they look at you, they think about me. They look at you, and they think Rorik should have done this. Rorik is weak. Rorik is hiding behind his mama's apron. You are making me look like a coward without saying a word." Jasper dried his hands on his pants. He looked at Rorik in the yellow porch light. Rorik was taller than he was and 40 pounds heavier and a year older. And Jasper was suddenly very tired in a way that felt older than 14. "Rorik, I do not care what the town thinks about you. I am not thinking about you at all. I am thinking about 160 acres of corn that has to be in the silo before the first hard freeze. I am thinking about an $1,800 note that comes due in March. I am thinking about my mother and my brother and my 2 sisters. I am not thinking about you, Rorik. I do not have room. You will lose Jasper. You will lose, and when you do, I am going to be the first one in line to laugh." "That is fine." Rorik stood there another moment, his face working. Then he turned and walked back to the truck and drove away. Jasper went into the house and sat at the kitchen table and stared at the list of bills until his mother came in from the bedroom and put a hand on his shoulder and told him to go to bed. 2 weeks later, he started harvesting corn. He drove the John Deere 60 out into the field at 6 in the morning with a 2-row corn picker behind it and the seat raised on a folded blanket so he could see over the dash. His feet did not quite reach the floor pedals. He had welded an extension onto the clutch lever. He worked from sunrise until he could no longer see the rows in the dark. Then he ate something cold, standing up at the kitchen sink, and slept 4 hours and went back out. He did this for 20 days. On the 7th day, Wilburn Crisp, a neighbor who farmed the place across the creek, drove his grain truck onto the Holloman field without asking, parked it at the end of a row, and began hauling loads to the elevator in town. He did not say anything about it. Jasper did not say anything either. Wilburn just showed up again on the 9th day, and the 11th, and the 14th. On the 16th day, Alden Mosby walked out into the field at dusk and found Jasper asleep at the wheel of the tractor at the end of a row, his head down on the steering wheel, his hands still on the throttle. Alden shut the tractor off. He picked the boy up the way you pick up a sleeping child, and Jasper did not wake. Alden carried him across the stubble to the house and laid him on the couch in the front room. Adelaide came in from the kitchen drying her hands. "He has not slept more than 4 hours a night for 3 weeks," she said. "Mrs. Holloman, I fought in the Pacific. I saw men go 3 days without sleep in a foxhole. I never saw anybody as tired as that boy is right now. Not even soldiers. What do you want me to do, Alden? He says his daddy told him to keep the farm. He is going to keep it. You have to let him stop." "I cannot, because if I make him stop, he will never forgive me, and he will never forgive himself." Alden Mosby was quiet for a long moment. He looked down at the boy on the couch. The boy's hands were chapped and bleeding at the knuckles. There was diesel under his fingernails and a smear of grease across his forehead. "Then I will help," Alden said. He went home. The next morning, he drove his grain truck back to the field at 5:30 and worked alongside Wilburn Crisp, hauling loads for the rest of the harvest, and neither man ever sent a bill. The town divided itself quietly that fall. There were people who took bets at the filling station that the boy would quit. There were others who did not say anything in public and showed up in the field at 5 in the morning. Jasper did not always know who was who. He found out years later that Mercer Tatum drove past the farm every Sunday afternoon for the entire harvest, slowing down at the property line, watching the corn come off, and never once stopping in. The corn came in at 78 bushels per acre, below the county average, decent for a 14-year-old farming alone. Jasper hauled the last load to the elevator on a Tuesday morning in early November. The manager weighed the truck and wrote out a ticket and slid it across the counter. He looked at Jasper for a long moment and started to say something. He changed his mind. He just nodded once and went back to his ledger. That night at the kitchen table, Jasper laid out $340 in cash in front of his mother. The bills were in stacks of 20. Property tax was paid. The electric was paid. The fuel bill was paid. The seed loan was paid. Quentin Pemberton's $1,800 is paid in full, signed off 3 months early. The $340 was what was left over. "This has to last us until March," Jasper said. Adelaide looked at the money on the kitchen table. She looked at her son. He was wearing his father's coat. The sleeves were still rolled 3 times. The boots were still by the back door, still stuffed with newspaper. Outside the kitchen window, the fields were stripped and empty and resting under a thin film of frost. The first freeze had come the night before. The corn had made it in 2 days ahead of the freeze. Adelaide put her head down on the kitchen table. She wept the way a woman weeps when she has been holding her breath for 40 days and she can finally let it out. And Jasper sat across from her and did not move and did not speak. He understood sitting there at 14 that his mother was not crying because he had failed. She was crying because he had succeeded. She was burying her husband for the second time, and this time the grave was the kitchen table, and the body in it was the man her son was no longer free to become. Jasper stood up after a while. He walked out onto the back porch. He looked up at the cold black sky. He counted 3 stars before he stopped counting. The farm had survived its first season. He knew standing there in the dark that this was only the first season. There would be 40 more. He did not yet know about Mercer Tatum's box of free parts that would arrive in December. He did not yet know that Wendell would write a school essay 2 years later about the man he admired most and refused to write it about him. He did not yet know that he would meet Rorick Calloway again on a hot afternoon in 1980 and hear an apology 17 years late. He did not yet know about the auction in 1970 where Quinton Pemberton would bid against him and lose. He did not yet know about the letter folded into Whitfield Tatum's jacket pocket in a Nashville ballroom in 2006, the one that would still be there when his father, the man behind the parts counter, was 20 years dead. He only knew that the boots had stayed on his feet for 40 days. He only knew that the coat had not fallen off his shoulders. He only knew that his father had told him to keep the farm, and the farm was kept for now for one more night. He went back inside. His mother had stopped crying. She had stacked the money neatly on the table and weighted it down with the salt shaker. She looked up at him as he came through the door, and for the first time since the funeral, she gave him a small, tired, real smile. "Go to bed, Jasper." "Yes, ma'am." He climbed the stairs in his father's boots. He took them off at the foot of the bed. He set them carefully against the wall toes, pointing out the way his father had always set them. He lay down beside his sleeping brother and closed his eyes, and somewhere in the dark, in a town 7 miles away, an old man at a parts counter wrote a single line on a yellow pad beside a telephone, the line he would not act on for another 6 weeks, the line that would change both their lives. The line said, "Go see the boy." $340 was supposed to last until March. By the second week of December, it was down to 210, and the snow was starting on the ridges to the north, and Jasper Holloman had not yet figured out how a family of 5 was going to eat through a Tennessee winter on a sum of money that would not have covered the price of one good cow. He took a job cutting tobacco for a man named Roy Maples, who had a place over in Bedford County, 30 miles east. Roy paid $1.75 an hour and did not ask how old anybody was. Jasper worked on Saturdays from before dawn until full dark, riding to the Maples place in the back of a flatbed with 3 older men who smoked rolled cigarettes and did not speak to him. He came home on Saturday nights with $8 folded into his shirt pocket and his hands so swollen he could not close them all the way. He worked through the spring tobacco cut and then the hay haul and then anything else that would put $1 on the kitchen table. By the middle of January, the 340 had stretched in the way poor people stretch money into something just barely enough. It was Wendell who broke first. 11 years old, small for his age, watching his older brother turn into something he did not recognize. The school assigned a paper that January. Mrs. Kofer, the 7th grade English teacher, asked her students to write 500 words about the person they admired most. Wendell Holloman brought his paper home on a Friday afternoon and laid it on the kitchen table beside his brother's empty supper plate. Jasper was eating standing up at the sink the way he had taken to doing. "Mrs. Kofer wrote a note on it," Wendell said. Jasper did not look at the paper. "What note?" "She said I should have written it about you." Jasper finally turned around. "What did you write it about?" "Daddy." The kitchen was very quiet. Adelaide was in the front room. The 2 girls were already in bed. "She said since Daddy is gone, the assignment was supposed to be about somebody alive. She said you would have been a fine choice. She said I should rewrite it over the weekend." "Are you going to?" Wendell looked at his brother for a long moment. He was wearing pajamas with cowboys on them that had been washed too many times. His face was thin in a way that 11-year-old faces are not supposed to be thin. "No." "Why not?" "Because you are not Daddy. You just give orders. You do not laugh anymore. You sleep on the tractor. You forgot my birthday this year. I would rather have you quit the farm than have you be like this." Wendell turned and walked out of the kitchen before Jasper could answer. Jasper stood at the sink with a piece of cold cornbread in his hand and listened to his brother climb the stairs. He set the cornbread down. He went out to the back porch in his sock feet in the cold and stood there for almost an hour. He did not cry. He did not go back inside until Adelaide came to the door and called him in. That night, lying awake in the bed he shared with Wendell, Jasper learned a thing he would carry the rest of his life. Saving the farm was not free. The price was his brother. He would pay that price for the next 18 years before he understood there was a way to pay it back. The Wednesday before Christmas, a green and yellow pickup truck pulled into the gravel drive of the Holloman farm. Mercer Tatum climbed down from the cave, 62 years old, in a wool coat and a felt hat, his breath showing white in the cold. He walked around to the bed of the truck and lifted out a wooden crate. The crate was full of parts: oil filters, air filters, 2 new fan belts in the right size for a John Deere 60, a box of spark plugs, 3 quarts of hydraulic fluid, a roll of friction tape, a packet of small machine bolts in assorted threads. None of it was new in the box. Most of it was inventory the dealership had been carrying for years. Mercer carried the crate into the barn. Jasper was inside alone, kneeling beside a disc harrow he had been trying to repair for 3 days. He looked up when the door opened. "I brought you a few things." Jasper stood. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. He looked at the crate. He looked at Mercer. He did not move toward the older man. "I do not have any money for parts right now, Mr. Tatum. They are not for sale." "What are they for, then?" Mercer set the crate on the workbench. He took off his hat and turned it around in his hands twice. He had been thinking about this conversation for 9 weeks. He had practiced the first sentence in his pickup on the drive over. The first sentence still came out wrong. "Your daddy was a good customer for a long time. I wanted to do something for the family." Jasper did not answer. He waited. The waiting went on long enough that Mercer had to look up from the brim of his hat and meet the boy's eyes, and when he did, he found himself face to face with something he had not expected. The boy was angry. "Mr. Tatum, 9 weeks ago you stood behind your counter and told me to go home. You told me to lease the ground. You told me my mother should get a job in town. You told me I was a child playing at a man's work, and you told it to me in front of Alden Mosby and Ed Henderson, and the whole town heard about it before I got home that afternoon. Now you have driven out here in your good coat with a crate of free parts. What do you think that fixes?" Mercer did not have a sentence ready for that. He set his hat down on the workbench beside the crate. He took off his reading glasses and cleaned them on the tail of his shirt and put them back on, although he was not reading anything. The barn was cold. The barn smelled like diesel and dust and the leather of his father's old coat. "Jasper, I was wrong about what you could do this fall. I was not wrong to be afraid for you. You are still 14. You harvested 1 crop. 1 crop is not farming. 40 crops is farming. You are going to have hard years, and you are going to have years where you almost lose the place, and you are going to have years where one decision in March determines what you eat in November. You are going to need help, real help, not a crate of parts." "What kind of help?" "The kind I should have offered you in October instead of telling you to go home." Jasper looked at the older man for a long time. The anger did not leave his face all at once. It left in stages the way ice leaves a creek, breaking up in small sections and floating downstream, until what is left underneath is just cold, dark water moving steadily on. "You want to teach me. I want to teach you what your father did not have time to." "Why?" "Because I have been driving past this farm every Sunday for 10 weeks, and every week I see something a 14-year-old boy is not supposed to be able to do, and every week I get back in my truck and drive home and tell my wife I am still the man who told him to go home. I cannot keep telling her that. I have to be something else." There was no sound in the barn except the wind under the eaves. Jasper walked over to the workbench and looked at what was in the crate. He picked up one of the air filters. He turned it over in his hands. He set it back down. All right. All right, what? All right, you can teach me. That was how it began. It did not begin with gratitude or with reconciliation. It began with a 14-year-old saying all right to an old man who had come to his barn because his wife could no longer stand to watch him, not sleep. It began as a transaction between two people who needed each other for very different reasons and were honest enough to admit it. The lesson started after the new year. Mercer came out to the farm on Tuesday evenings every week for the next 19 years. He brought a leather portfolio with crop rotation charts inside and copies of the county extension reports and worn pencils that he sharpened with a pocket knife at the kitchen table. Adelaide made coffee. Wendell, when he was old enough, sat at the corner of the table and listened. Jasper learned soil chemistry and equipment, depreciation, and how to read a futures price in the back of the Nashville banner. He learned how to talk to a banker, although he never used the lesson because he had decided in October of 1963 that he would never set foot inside First Tennessee Bank as a borrower, and he never did. 2 months into the lessons on a Tuesday night with a cold rain coming down, outside, Jasper drove the pickup over to the Tatum place to pick up a fertilizer guidebook Mercer had set aside for him. He had never been to Mercer's house before. The dealership was on Mooresville Pike. The house was 3 streets behind it, a small, white frame house with green shutters and a screened porch, and a maple tree in the front yard that had been there since before the war. Beulah Tatum came to the door. She was 60 years old, gray hair pinned up, wearing a blue house dress and an apron that smelled like pie crust. She had been a junior high English teacher for 31 years before she retired, and she had a way of looking at a young person that suggested she had already made up her mind about him and intended to be kind about it. "You must be Jasper. Come in out of the rain. I just came for the book, ma'am." "You came for the book, and you will stay for supper." Mercer is washing up. He had not eaten a hot meal cooked by another person in 3 months. He sat at the Tatum dining room table and ate pot roast and green beans and biscuits with butter, and he ate 2 helpings of everything, and he did not speak much, and Beulah did not press him to. After supper, Mercer went into his study to find the fertilizer book, and Beulah sat down across from Jasper at the table and folded her hands. "Jasper, I would like to tell you something, and I would like you to hear it in the spirit it is meant." "Yes, ma'am." "The night you came into the dealership in October, Mercer came home and could not eat his supper. He sat in this chair right here, and he set his fork down and he said, 'Beulah, I told a dead man's son to go home.' And then he did not sleep for 3 nights. I would walk past the bedroom door at 2 in the morning and I would hear him turning. He has carried a lot of things in his life, Jasper. He carried his own father out of a coal seam in Kentucky when he was 19 years old. He carried a brother through Bellow Wood in 1918. He has never once in 50 years carried something the way he is carrying you." Jasper looked at his folded hands on the tablecloth. "He is not driving out to your place every Tuesday because he believes you cannot do it without him. He has watched you for 3 months. He believes you can do it. He is driving out there because he cannot live with himself unless he does. The help is not for you, Jasper. The help is for him. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "I think I do." "Then I will say to you what I cannot say to him. Let him help. Take the help. Do not be proud about it. He is 62 years old and he is sorry for what he said. And the only way he gets to put it down is if you let him pick it up. You would be doing him a kindness. The kindness goes both ways. That is the part nobody tells you when you are 14. Mercer came back into the dining room with the fertilizer book under his arm. Beulah stood up and began clearing the plates and did not look at either of them. Jasper took the book and thanked her for supper and drove home through the rain, and he understood for the first time that grown men sometimes need a child to forgive them. And his job was not just to learn farming, his job was also to let himself be forgiven on Mercer's behalf. He never told Mercer what Beulah said. He never told anyone, in fact, until the spring after Mercer died, 26 years later, when he told Whitfield Tatum at the cemetery, and Whitfield cried for the first time since the funeral. 2 years passed in a kind of compressed blur. Jasper was 16, then 17. The corn came in better the second year, 94 bushels per acre, and better still the third, because Mercer had walked him through the soil tests and they had begun rotating in soybeans and clover. Wendell was 13. In June of 1965, on a hot blue afternoon, Wendell came out to the equipment shed where Jasper was rebuilding the carburetor on the John Deere. He stood in the doorway. He was almost as tall as Jasper already. Jasper, yeah, teach me to drive the tractor. Jasper set down the wrench. He turned around. His brother was standing there in a t-shirt and dungarees with a streak of dirt on his cheek looking at the floor. Why now? Because I am tired of being mad at you. I want to help. That was the whole conversation. Jasper walked out into the yard with his brother, climbed up onto the John Deere and slid over so Wendell could fit on the seat in front of him. He showed Wendell the clutch and the throttle and the hydraulic lever and the wheel brakes. Wendell was a fast learner the way Jasper had been a fast learner, the way Hollis Holloman had been a fast learner before either of them. Within an hour, Wendell was driving the tractor up and down the lane on his own, slow and careful, and Jasper stood at the gate and watched him and did not say anything because there was nothing he trusted himself to say. Adelaide came out onto the porch with a dish towel in her hands and watched too. She did not say anything either. That night at supper, she put a second piece of pie on each of her son's plates without comment, and that was how the truce was sealed. It was a truce, it was not a peace. The wound did not heal, it only stopped bleeding. The wound would open again 13 years later in the same kitchen, over a different table, and that time it would take 3 more years to close. Jasper did not know that yet. In the summer of 1965, he stood at the gate and watched his 13-year-old brother drive a tractor in a straight line, and he allowed himself to believe, for the first time since their father had died, that the family might survive. Jasper graduated from Marshall County High School in May of 1967, ranked 18th in a class of 42. He had slept through a great many afternoon classes. Mr. Pettigrew, his agriculture teacher, wrote in his yearbook, "Jasper sleeps in my class because he is the only student I have ever taught who has a real reason. He is the finest farmer I have ever taught, although he has never once turned in a paper on time." Jasper kept the yearbook. He has it still. The night before the application deadline for the agriculture program at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, Adelaide put a manila envelope on the kitchen table after supper. The envelope was full of cash, $2,000. She had been saving it for 6 years in a coffee can at the back of the pantry, dollar by dollar, out of grocery money and church envelopes, and what she earned doing alterations for the women in town. "Your father wanted you to go to college, Jasper. He told me on our wedding night. He told me again the week we found out I was pregnant with you. He told me 100 times in 18 years. There is enough here for 2 years of tuition. The rest you can earn during summers. I have already filled out half of the application." Jasper sat at the kitchen table and looked at the envelope. He looked at his mother. She was 42 years old. She had aged 25 years in the force since the funeral. "Mom, I cannot leave for 4 years. Wendell is 15. He cannot run this place by himself. We do not have the cash to hire a man." "I will find a way." "We do not have the cash, Mom." "Then we will sell 40 acres. "We are not selling 40 acres of Daddy's land to send me to school in Knoxville. That is not what he meant when he told me to keep the farm." Adelaide put her face in her hands. She did not cry the way she had cried at the kitchen table that first November night. This was different. This was the cry of a woman who had been holding something in for 6 years and could no longer hold it. Jasper, listen to me. Listen carefully. Your father did not want you to live his life. Your father wanted you to live a better one. I heard him say it on the porch 100 times before he died. He said, Adelaide, I want my children to go further than I went. He said it to me on the night before he died. Do you hear me? The same night he told you to keep the farm. He told both of us things that night. He told you to keep the farm. He told me to make sure you did not spend the rest of your life keeping it. Jasper stood up from the table. He walked to the back door and put his hand on the screen and stood there looking out at the dark fields. He stood there for almost an hour. Adelaide did not follow him. She sat at the table with the envelope in front of her and waited. When he came back in, his face was very still. I'm sorry, Mom, I cannot go. She did not answer. She picked up the envelope and put it back in the coffee can in the pantry. She did not speak to him at breakfast the next morning. She did not speak to him at supper. The silence lasted 4 days. On the 5th morning, she set a cup of coffee in front of him and said good morning the way she always had, and they never spoke of the envelope or the application again. The $2,000 stayed in the coffee can. 8 years later, on a Saturday morning in June of 1975, Adelaide took it out of the can and added it to the stack of cash Jasper had been saving, and they put it toward the down payment on the second tractor. She never said anything when she did it. She just laid the bills on the table and went out to feed the chickens. Jasper knew. He understood what it cost her. He never said anything either because there was nothing to say. Wilbur and Chris retired in the spring of 1970. He was 73 years old and his wife had a bad hip and they wanted to move to Florida to live near their daughter. He put 80 acres up for auction at the Marshall County Courthouse on the second Saturday of April. The 80 acres adjoined the Holloman place along the eastern fence line. It was good ground level, well drained with a creek along the south edge. Jasper had been waiting 6 years for it to come on the market. He was 21 years old. He had $14,000 in cash in 2 stacks in a leather satchel his father had owned. The money represented 7 years of saving every dollar he had not absolutely needed. He had not bought a new pair of work boots in 3 years. He had not taken a single day off since 1963 except for funerals. The $14,000 was the entire result of those 7 years. The auction was held on the courthouse steps at 10 in the morning. 27 people stood in the spring sunshine. Jasper wore a clean white shirt and a tie his mother had made him put on. Mercer Tatum stood at the back of the crowd with his arms folded. He had not told Jasper he was coming. He just came. The auctioneer opened the bidding at $8,000. A hand went up at $10,000. The crowd thinned in the way crowds thin when the price gets serious, and at $11,000 only 2 bidders were left. One of them was Jasper. The other was Quentin Pemberton. Quentin Pemberton was 53 years old now. He was no longer a loan officer. He had moved up to vice president of First Tennessee Bank, and on this particular Saturday morning, he was bidding as the agent for an investor out of Nashville who wanted Tennessee farmland for portfolio reasons. He stood across the courthouse steps in a charcoal suit with a yellow tie. He had not seen Jasper Holloman in person in 7 years. He recognized him immediately. 11-5, Pemberton said. 12, said Jasper. 12-5. 13. 13-5. The auctioneer looked at Jasper. Jasper's hand was in his coat pocket on the leather satchel. He had $800 in his other pocket as a margin. He had nothing else. The $14,000 was a hard ceiling. He had told himself in the truck on the way over that he would walk away at 14 if he had to. 14,000, Jasper said. The crowd made a small sound. The auctioneer turned to Pemberton. Quentin Pemberton looked across the courthouse steps at the 21-year-old in the white shirt and the borrowed tie. He looked at the leather satchel. He looked at the crowd. He had authority from his investor up to $15,000. He could have taken the property. He chose not to. He folded the bid card in his hand and slid it into his jacket pocket and shook his head at the auctioneer. Sold, the auctioneer said. Jasper walked into the courthouse and signed the papers. He walked back out with the deed to 240 acres in his name. He was 21 years old. Quentin Pemberton intercepted him on the steps before he reached the truck. Mr. Holloman, a word. Mr. Pemberton, you are aware, I am sure, that you were lucky today. I am aware that I outbid you. That is not the same thing as not being lucky. I have been doing this kind of work for 27 years, son. Every farmer loses eventually. The question is not whether. The question is when. When yours comes, I will be there. I will buy this ground from your widow at 30 cents on the dollar, and I will not feel one moment of guilt about it because I will have warned you. Today is the warning, remember it. Jasper looked at him. He did not answer for a long count. Mr. Pemberton, my mother is not going to be a widow selling land. My wife, when I have one, is not going to be a widow selling land. You have warned me 3 times now in 7 years. The first time was at my mother's kitchen table. The second time was on the courthouse steps 3 minutes ago. This is the third. I am going to ask you respectfully not to do it a 4th time. Good day. He walked past Pemberton and got into the truck and drove home with the deed in the glove compartment. Mercer Tatum met him at the gate at the end of the lane. Mercer had driven over from the courthouse without Jasper seeing him leave. He was leaning on the fence with his hat in his hand. You did all right, son. I almost didn't. Almost is the only kind of winning there is in this work. Anybody who tells you different is selling you something. Jasper shut off the truck. He sat in the cab for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Mercer came around to the driver's side and put his hand on the open window frame. Jasper, there is one other thing you need to hear. Yes, sir. Quentin Pemberton is not done with you. He is not done with this family. Men like him take losing personally even when it is just a piece of dirt. He will look for a way to get back at you. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 10 years, but it will come. Be ready for it. Jasper nodded slowly. I have been ready for it since I was 14, Mr. Tatum. He drove the truck up to the house. His mother was on the porch. She was 45 years old and her hair had gone gray 3 years earlier, and she was holding a dish towel in her hands the way she always did when she was about to cry. He climbed out of the truck and held up the deed. She did not say anything. She walked down the porch steps and put her arms around her oldest son in the front yard in plain sight of the road, and she held on to him for a long time. That night, he wrote in the ledger, April 11th, 1970, 80 acres, Wilburn Crisp Place, paid in full, no debt. He underlined the words no debt twice. 8 years later, on an October evening, Wendell Holloman walked into that same kitchen and laid a folded piece of paper on the table in front of his older brother. Jasper did not pick it up. What is it? It is a contract for sale on 80 acres in Bedford County, $18,000. I have saved 12. Mom is co-signing the rest. I am moving in March. Jasper put down his fork. He looked at his brother. Wendell was 26 years old. He had been working the farm for 13 years. He was the second best farmer in Marshall County, and the only person better was sitting across the table from him. You did not talk to me about this. I did not need to talk to you about it. I am 26. I know what I am doing. You are not ready, Wendell. You do not have the equipment. You do not have the cash reserve. One bad year and you will lose it. Wendell stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. He put both hands on the kitchen table and leaned across it. You sound exactly like Mercer Tatum did in October of 1963. You remember how much you hated him for it. You remember telling me that story, Jasper. You remember every word he said and how it felt, and how you walked out of that dealership and swore you would prove him wrong. You remember. You are him now. I am the boy in the doorway, and I am going to do what you did. I am going to drive to a different dealership. Jasper did not move for a very long time. Wendell was breathing hard. The chair was on the floor. From the front room came the sound of the radio playing low. When Jasper finally spoke, his voice was very quiet. Go on then. Buy the place. If you need help, call me. I will not call you. Wendell picked up the chair and set it upright and walked out of the kitchen. The screen door slammed behind him. Jasper sat at the table and looked at the contract for sale lying beside his half-eaten plate of supper. He picked it up. He read it through. The land was decent ground. The price was fair. Wendell had done his work. Jasper laid the contract back down on the table and put his face in his hands, and he understood sitting there at the age of 29 that he had become the very man he had spent 15 years not becoming. The circle had closed. The boy in the dealership doorway in October of 1963 had grown up to stand on the other side of the counter. The only difference was that this time the boy he was telling no to was his brother. Wendell left for Bedford County in March of 1979. The brothers did not speak for the next 3 years. A letter arrived in the mail 8 days after Wendell left. It said, I signed the papers. The land is mine. Jasper folded it and put it in the desk drawer in the front room and went outside. He stood in the lane that night under a hard, cold sky in early spring, and for the first time since he was 14 years old, he felt lost. He did not know where to put what he was carrying. His father was 16 years dead. Mercer Tatum was almost 80. His brother was gone. The farm had grown to 240 acres and was about to grow more, and the boy in the boots had become a man in his 30s, and the man in his 30s was standing alone in a field in the dark, holding a letter from his brother that said almost nothing and meant almost everything. He did not know yet that the next year would bring a drought worse than any in living memory. He did not know yet that the drought would carry Quentin Pemberton's prophecy out into the open country and lay it down at the feet of farmers all across the state. He did not know yet that on a hot August afternoon in 1980, while he was working alone on his irrigation pump, a stranger's pickup truck would slow at his gate, and a man he had not seen in 17 years would climb out, and the conversation that followed would change the way Jasper Holloman understood every fight he had ever been in. He folded the letter from his brother and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. He walked back up the lane to the house. The porch light was on. His mother was waiting in the kitchen. The seasons would turn. There were still 40 crops to bring in. The summer of 1980 broke records that had stood for 60 years. The rain stopped in the second week of June and did not start again until the middle of October. Pasture grass turned the color of old straw by the 4th of July. Stock ponds shrank to brown puddles ringed in cracked mud. Corn that should have stood 8 feet tall in August was tasseling at 4 feet, the kernels half-formed and chalky. Across Middle Tennessee, men sat at kitchen tables in the evening and added up numbers that did not add up, and the for sale signs began appearing along the county roads in a slow procession that lasted from August into the following spring. Jasper Holloman was 31 years old. He had 240 acres free and clear, a second tractor he had bought, used in 1975, and an underground irrigation system he had installed 5 years earlier when nobody else in the county thought it was worth the cost. The system pulled from a deep well he had drilled in 1976 against the advice of the wellman, who had said no farmer pumps from that depth, and the wellman had been wrong. While his neighbors were watching their corn die in the field, Jasper was running his pumps at 5 in the morning and again at sunset, and his ground stayed green into August. On a Wednesday afternoon in the second week of August, a faded blue Chevrolet pickup slowed at the entrance to the Holloman Lane and pulled in. Jasper was at the southwest corner of the property on his knees beside an irrigation header, replacing a cracked coupling. He heard the truck before he saw it. He stood up, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked back to the gate. The man who climbed out of the truck was 32 years old, heavy in the chest, wearing work pants and a Goodyear cap pushed back on his forehead. 17 years had passed since Jasper had last seen him. The face had thickened. The eyes had not changed. It was Rorick Calloway. He had moved up to Nashville in 1969 and taken a job at the steel mill on Trinity Lane. He had not been home to Marshall County more than 4 or 5 times in 11 years. He was driving down to see his mother that afternoon. He had passed the Holloman place on the way in. He had pulled over. Jasper walked to the fence and rested his forearms on the top rail. Rorick came up to the other side. Neither man spoke for almost a minute. "How are you, Rorick?" "How am I? How are you? The whole county is brown and your fields look like June. I drilled a well in '76. I heard about that well. People said you were crazy. They were not all wrong." Rorick took off his cap and ran his hand through hair that had gone thin on top. He looked out across the green fields. He looked at his old neighbor who had become a stranger 17 years ago in a yard at dusk after a funeral. "I owe you something, Jasper." "You do not owe me anything. I owe you a sentence I said to you in October of 1963 about your daddy, about what would happen to you. I have thought about that sentence on and off for 17 years. I thought about it on the drive down here today. I am not leaving Marshall County this afternoon without saying it out loud." "Rorick, let me finish. I came up your driveway because I was going to ask you how you did it, how you held on when nobody else did, how my place got leased to Alden Mosby and your place is still your place. I was going to ask you the question like there was a trick to it. There is not a trick to it. I know there is not. The truth is I was the one who quit. My mama signed that lease, but I was the one who let her. I was 15 and I was scared and I let her sign it. I have been blaming her for 17 years. I am 32 years old and I work in a steel mill, and I am tired of blaming my mother." Jasper did not say anything. He let the man across the fence keep talking. "I hated you, Jasper, for 17 years. Because every time my mama's name came up, somebody in town would mention you in the same breath, and there was always a comparison, and I was always on the wrong side of it. I hated you because you did not give me an excuse. If you had quit, I could have lived with it. You did not quit. Rorick, I never thought about you, not once. I was not trying to make you look bad. I was just trying to keep the lights on. That is what makes it worse. You did not even notice me. I have been carrying this for 17 years, and you did not even know there was a fight." Jasper leaned on the fence. He looked at Rorick Calloway. He thought about the boy in the yard the night after the funeral. He thought about how thin Rorick had been, how angry, how much that anger had been the only thing holding the boy upright. "I'm sorry, Rorick." "For what?" "For not noticing. For walking past you for 17 years without seeing you were drowning. We were both 15. I should have known. You were 14. I should have known anyway." Rorick put his cap back on. He looked at the ground for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. "I am sorry for what I said about your daddy that night. I am sorry I told you that you would lose. I am sorry I took bets at the station against a 14-year-old boy whose father had just died. I am sorry. I forgot it a long time ago." "I have not." "Then put it down, Rorick. You can put it down right here at the gate. You do not have to carry it back up the road to Nashville with you." Rorick nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. He climbed back into the pickup. Jasper watched him drive out the lane and turn south toward town. He watched the dust settle behind the truck. He stood at the gate for a long time after the truck was gone, and he understood with a clarity he had not felt in 17 years that forgiveness is not something you give to other people. Forgiveness is the act of setting down what you have been carrying for them so you can use both your hands again. He walked back to the irrigation header. He finished the coupling. He went home for supper. The drought broke in the second week of October. By then it had taken half the family farms in Bedford County. Wendell Holloman called his older brother on a Tuesday afternoon in March of 1981. He had not picked up a telephone to dial that number in 3 years. Adelaide answered. She did not speak when she heard his voice. She just held the receiver out toward Jasper without a word. Jasper came in from the front room. Jasper. Wendell. I am in trouble. I am on my way. Jasper hung up the phone, picked up his coat, and was on the road inside 10 minutes. The drive to Bedford County was 40 minutes on the back roads. He pulled into Wendell's lane just before sunset. Wendell was sitting on the front step of the small white farmhouse, his elbows on his knees, his head down. The fields beyond the house were brown and bare. There was a tax notice taped to the front door. Jasper sat down beside his brother on the step. He did not speak for a while. Wendell was crying. He had not cried in front of his brother since the day of their father's funeral 18 years earlier. How bad, Jasper said. 60% of the corn was a loss. The bank moved up the maturity on the operating note. They want $20,000 by April 15th or they take the place. I have $8,000. Why didn't you call me? Wendell wiped his face with the back of his hand. Because I told you in your kitchen that I would not call. Because I have been 26 years old in my own head ever since that night. Because I have been trying to prove to you for 3 years that I did not need you. Because I was wrong and I did not know how to say I was wrong, and now the bank is going to take the place I bought to prove I did not need you, and I am going to lose it because I was too proud to dial a phone. Jasper did not look at his brother. He looked at the brown fields. He reached inside his coat and took out a brown paper envelope. He laid it on the step between them. $22,000, he said. Cash. I have been carrying it in the truck since you called. Jasper, I cannot take that. It is not a loan. What is it? It is back wages. You worked for me from the time you were 13 until the day you left. 15 years. I paid you what I could afford to pay you, which was not what the work was worth. You knew it. I knew it. We did not talk about it. This is the difference between what I paid you and what the work was worth. I have been adding it up in a notebook for 15 years. I always meant to give it to you. I just did not know when. I think now is when. Wendell picked up the envelope. He held it in both hands. His shoulders began to shake. Jasper, I do not deserve. Stop. I am not finished. You said something to me in my kitchen the night you left that I have not been able to put down for 3 years. You told me I had become Mercer Tatum. You were right. I told a 26-year-old man he was not ready when what I should have done was open my hands and trust him. I have spent 3 years angry at you for being angry at me, and the whole time I was angry at myself for being him. I am sorry, Wendell. I am sorry I told you you were not ready. You were ready. I was the one who was not ready to let you go. Wendell set the envelope down on the step and put his face in his hands. He cried the way a grown man cries when the thing he has been holding back for a decade finally gives way. Jasper put his arm around his brother's shoulders. They sat there on the step until the sun went all the way down and the porch lamp came on automatically over their heads, and they did not need to say anything else, and the brothers were brothers again. Wendell paid the bank on April 12th. He kept the farm. He paid Jasper back in full over the next 9 years in installments, although Jasper never asked for the money and never cashed the first 3 checks. The fourth check Jasper cashed because Wendell called him on the phone and told him he would never accept another piece of charity from his brother as long as he lived. After that, Jasper cashed every check. By 1990, the debt was settled. The brotherhood had been settled long before that on the porch step with the envelope between them. Mercer Tatum closed the dealership in the fall of 1983. He was 82 years old. He had run the place for 45 years. On the last Saturday in September, he locked the doors for the final time. Jasper drove into Lewisburg that morning. The two of them stood in the empty showroom together. The tractors were gone, the part shelves were empty. The yellow pad that had sat beside the telephone for 20 years was missing. Only the desk and a single wooden chair remained. Mercer, Jasper, I never thanked you properly. You do not need to. I need to. I have needed to for 20 years and I have not done it. That makes me a poor student of yours. Mercer sat down at the chair. He looked very small in it. He looked at the boy who was now a man of 34 standing in front of him. You did not need a teacher, Jasper. You needed a witness. There is a difference. A teacher fills you up with what you do not have. A witness watches you become what you already were. I was not your teacher. I was your witness. There were a great many things you knew at 14 that I did not have to put in your head. I just had to be in the room while you remembered them. You were my second father, Mercer. No, son. I was not your father. Hollis was your father. He stayed your father after he died. I was a friend who showed up late. Do not give me a job that belonged to him. He earned it. I just kept the seat warm for him. Jasper did not answer. He put a hand on Mercer's shoulder. The shoulder was thinner than it had been a year before. Mercer reached up and patted Jasper's hand twice, and they stood that way for a long moment in the empty room. Mercer Tatum died on a Tuesday morning in February of 1989. Pneumonia after a long winter. He was 88 years old. The funeral was held at First Methodist in Lewisburg. Reverend Pruitt, who had retired 16 years earlier and moved to Atlanta to live near his daughter, was too frail to make the trip. A younger minister presided. Jasper served as a pallbearer. He stood at the right rear corner of the casket beside Whitfield Tatum Mercer's son, who was 50 years old and had flown in from Memphis. After the service in the church hall, Whitfield pulled Jasper aside near the coffee urn. He held out his hand. Jasper took it. They shook. My father talked about you a lot, Whitfield said. I'm sorry if that was a hard thing to hear. It was for a long time. I want to be honest with you, Mr. Holloman. I resented you for most of my adult life. I am his son. You were the boy down the road. He talked about you the way I wished he had talked about me. Jasper was quiet for a moment. Whitfield, your father was not making a comparison between you and me. He was making peace with himself. You were never on the other side of that. I was just the project he chose because he could not undo what he had said in October of 1963. He was trying to fix one sentence. He spent 26 years on it. You were never the price. I was. Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. I never thought of it that way. I would not have either if I had been you. Whitfield reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and took out a small white envelope. The envelope was creased from being carried. Jasper's name was written on the front in a shaky hand. He recognized the handwriting. He wrote this 5 years ago. He gave it to me the Christmas after he closed the dealership. He told me to give it to you when the time was right. I have been carrying it around for 5 years trying to figure out when that was. I think it is today. Jasper took the envelope. He did not open it in the church hall. He thanked Whitfield. He drove home. He did not open the envelope when he got home either. He set it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while. Adelaide came in from the front room. She was 64 years old now. gray and slow but still sharp-eyed. What is that? A letter from Mercer. Now, he wrote it 5 years ago. Whitfield just gave it to me at the funeral. Are you going to read it? I am working up to it. Adelaide put a cup of coffee in front of him and sat down across the table. She did not press him. She had learned a long time ago not to press her oldest son. They sat together in the kitchen for a while in silence. Then she stood up, kissed him on the top of the head, and went to bed. Jasper opened the envelope. The handwriting was Mercer's but uneven, as if the pen had been heavy in his hand. The letter said, "Jasper, I told you to go home because I thought I was being kind. You stayed because your father told you to stay. We were both right, but you were more right. I have spent 45 years selling tractors, and 26 of them trying to make up for one sentence I said to a 14-year-old in boots that did not fit. I never made up for it. But watching you farm all these years came close. You are the finest farmer I have ever known, and I knew your father. Mercer." Jasper read the letter once. He read it again. He folded it carefully along the original creases and put it inside the breast pocket of his shirt. He sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. He did not weep. He listened to the kitchen clock. He understood for the first time something he had not understood in 26 years. Mercer Tatum had not been an enemy who became a teacher. Mercer had been a witness. The only one besides Jasper himself who had seen the entire road from beginning to end. And now the witness was gone. Jasper was alone with the story for the rest of his life. He put the letter back in the breast pocket and walked outside. The night was cold and clear. He stood under the porch light and looked out at the fields. The land was quiet. He understood standing there that grief is not what you feel when somebody dies. Grief is what you feel when the last person who can confirm what you remember is the only one who can no longer speak. He went back inside. He hung the coat on its hook. He carried the letter upstairs and laid it in the top drawer of his bedside table where it stayed for the rest of his life. In the spring of 1990, Jasper founded a program. He did not call it a foundation. He did not call it a charity. He drove around Marshall County and the 4 counties that touched it and found families where a parent had died and a farm was at risk of being lost, and he matched the children with neighbors who were willing to teach. He paid no salaries. He drew no maps. He kept a notebook with names. The first name in the notebook was Marigold Yancey. She was 13 years old. Her father had died of pancreatic cancer in March. Her mother was talking to a real estate agent. Jasper drove out to the Yancey place on a Saturday morning in May. He sat with Mrs. Yancey at her kitchen table. He did not lecture her. He simply offered Marigold a place on his tractor every Saturday. He offered to teach her what he knew. He offered to drive over every weekend until she was old enough to keep the place herself. He told Mrs. Yancey that the decision about the land was hers to make, but that Marigold was old enough to learn the work, and the work would be there if she wanted it. Mrs. Yancey looked across the table at her daughter. Marigold was already nodding. The lessons started the next Saturday. They went on for 6 years. Marigold Yancey is 50 years old now. She still farms her father's place. She has expanded it to 400 acres. She runs a feed cooperative in 3 counties. She named her oldest son after her father and her second son after Jasper, and she has not forgotten a single Saturday. One afternoon near the end of the first summer of the lessons, Marigold asked Jasper a question while they were sitting on the gate of his pickup eating sandwiches. "Mr. Holloman, why are you doing this for me? You do not owe me anything. There was a man named Mercer Tatum. He told me to go home when I was your age. Then he came back and taught me everything for 26 years. He died last year. I cannot pay him back. I can only pay it forward. That is what you are." Who am I going to pay it forward to? You will know when the time comes. She did. By the time she was 30, Marigold Yancey had taken on 3 orphaned farm kids of her own. The notebook Jasper kept in his desk drawer eventually contained 31 names. 22 of those young people were still farming in 2020. The land had stayed in the families. The witnesses had multiplied. Mercer Tatum's one sentence in October of 1963 had become, over the course of 57 years, the seed of a quiet and stubborn restoration spread across a corner of one southern state. None of it was named after him. He would not have wanted it named after him. The work itself was the name. Jasper sat in his second suit on the front row of the ballroom in Nashville on the spring evening in 2006. The first suit had been his father's. He had worn it once at 14 to a funeral. The second suit he had bought in 2005 for a wedding. He was 57 years old. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His hands were the hands of a man who had pulled a clutch on a 1955 John Deere by lantern light and had never quite stopped working since. The presenter read the citation. 43 years of continuous operation, 740 acres, 0 debt, 11 consecutive years of top soil quality ratings, then the line that made the room go quiet. Jasper walked to the podium. He looked out at 200 faces. He saw Whitfield Tatum in the second to last row. Whitfield had his eyes closed. Jasper did not speak from notes. He spoke for 90 seconds. My father died when I was 14. A man named Mercer Tatum told me to go home. I did not go. He came out to the farm in December that same year with a box of parts and an apology, and he taught me almost everything I know about this work, and he kept teaching me for 26 years until he died. He would have liked to be in this room tonight. He has been gone 17 years. This award belongs to 3 people. My father gave me the farm. My mother did not stop me when I was too young to be stopped. Mercer Tatum came back after he had been wrong. I am the one wearing the suit, but the suit is for them. The boots my father left me are still in a barn on the farm. I do not wear them anymore. I do not need to. Thank you. He stepped away from the podium. The ballroom rose. He did not look up. He walked back to his seat. Whitfield Tatum wiped his face with a handkerchief in the second to last row. In the spring of 2026, a young reporter from a Nashville magazine drove down to Marshall County to interview the 77-year-old farmer about a documentary that was being made about the Tatum-Holloman Initiative. They sat on the front porch of the same house Jasper had grown up in. The porch boards had been replaced twice. The view of the fields had not changed. Jasper's son, Hollis Jr., was running most of the operation, now 640 acres of it. Jasper still kept 200 for himself. He still drove the John Deere 60 around the home place once a week, mostly for company. The reporter asked her last question near the end of the afternoon. Mr. Holloman, what would you say to a 14-year-old who just lost a parent and was told to give up? Jasper sat with his coffee in his lap and looked out at the western fence line where his great-grandfather had planted black walnut trees in 1898. The trees were 128 years old. They were still standing. Some of them had been there longer than the United States had been driving automobiles. I would tell him what my father told me the night before he died. Keep the place. Do not let anybody tell you it is too much. Then I would tell him what Mercer Tatum taught me after he stopped being wrong. Asking for help is not giving up. It is growing up. My father gave me the farm. Mercer helped me keep it. I needed both. Do you have any regrets? Jasper thought for a while. He thought about the kitchen table in 1967 and the manila envelope of cash. He thought about his brother on the porch step in 1981. He thought about the empty showroom in 1983. I regret that my father did not live to see the day the bank note was paid. I regret that Mercer did not live a few more years to hear me thank him better than I did. I regret that Wendell and I lost 3 years over something we could have fixed in 3 weeks if either of us had picked up a phone. Beyond those, I do not have any regrets. I had what I needed. I had people. That is more than most men get. The reporter closed her notebook. She thanked him. She walked to her car. Jasper watched her drive down the lane and out onto the county road. He stood up and walked across the yard to the equipment shed. The shed had been rebuilt in 1994 after a windstorm took the original. Inside, in the back corner on a low shelf made of cedar, stood a pair of leather work boots. Hollis Holloman's boots. The newspaper packed into the toes had yellowed and crumbled to dust over the decades. Jasper had not thrown the boots away. He had not put them in the house either. He had kept them in the shed because the shed was where the work happened and the boots had been work boots. That was where they belonged. He picked them up. He turned them over. On the bottom of the right heel, scratched into the leather with the point of a pocket knife by a 14-year-old hand on a Thursday morning in October of 1963, were 3 letters, H.J.A. Hollis, James Holloman. The boy who had put on those boots that morning had carved his father's initials into the heel before he walked out the door so he would not forget whose feet had been in them first. Jasper set the boots back on the shelf. He stood in the doorway of the shed and looked out across the fields. The afternoon light was the color of unspun wool. A crow called from the line of black walnut trees along the western fence. He thought not for the first time about a moment from the very beginning of the story, the morning in the dealership when Mercer Tatum had told him to go home. He thought about how angry he had been. He thought about how alone. He thought about how the boots had been too big for him then, and how the coat had hung off his shoulders, and how the only thing in the world he had been sure of was a sentence his father had spoken to him on the porch the night before he died. The boots fit now. They fit not because his feet had grown into them, although they had. They fit because he had walked far enough in them that the leather had taken the shape of his stride. The boots had become his. The work had become his. The land had become his. The promise his father had made him had become his. He turned out the light in the shed. He closed the door. He walked back across the yard to the house. The porch light was on. Inside, his wife of 44 years was setting out plates for supper. His son was on the phone in the front room arguing with a feed dealer in Columbia. The television was on low in the corner of the kitchen. The smell of cornbread came through the screen. Jasper went up the back steps. He took off his work coat at the door. He hung it on the hook beside the boots his great-grandson would wear in another 10 years. When the boy was old enough to start helping in the field the way Jasper had started at 9, the way Hollis had started before him, the way Hollis's father had started in 1898 in the same yard under the same trees. The seasons would turn, the witnesses would multiply, the boots would fit the next set of feet when those feet were ready. Jasper Holloman washed his hands at the sink and sat down to supper with his family. The fields outside the kitchen window were quiet in the falling light. The walnut trees stood along the fence line where they had stood for 128 years. The promise was kept. The promise had always been kept. The promise would go on being kept after he was gone by the children he had taught and the grandchildren they had taught. The way it had been kept by him, the way it had been kept for him by a man behind a parts counter who had been wrong once and spent the rest of his life setting it right. That was enough. That had always been enough.